In this video, let's look at how to compare fractions by finding a common denominator. This is one of the most common ways for comparing fractions. To be able to use this method, you will need to know what equivalent fractions are and how to find the least common multiple of 2 or 3 numbers. Now, if you're not familiar with these two concepts, I suggest that you first review these concepts before going through this video. So let's look at how you would compare fractions by finding a common denominator. Let me take two numbers, 3/4 and 5/8. Now 3/4 and 5/8 don't have a common denominator, but how can I make them into a common denominator? So somehow I know that there is a relationship between fourths and eighths. So if I take 3/4, I know to make fourths into eighths, I can do that by multiplying the 4 by 2. And if I multiply the denominator by 2, I should also multiply the numerator by 2. And that's going to give me 6/8. And if I compare that with 5/8, I know 6/8 is greater than 5/8. So if I go back to my original two fractions of 3/4 and 5/8, 3/4, which is also equal to 6/8, so 3/4 is greater than 5/8. Let me take another example. Let's take the example of 2/3 and 5/8. Now the way you would find a common denominator is by finding a multiple that's common to both 8 and 3. Now you notice that 8 and 3 have no factors in common. So in fact, one common multiple for 8 and 3 is 8 times 3. So let me write that down here. Common multiple for 8 and 3 is 8 times 3. So if 8 times 3, which is equal to 24, if 8 times 3 is a common multiple, I can make that into my common denominator, and let's see therefore what equivalent fractions I need to come up with. So I know 2/3 if I need a denominator of 3 times 8, so I'm multiplying the denominator by 8. I need to multiply the numerator by 8 also. I have 16/24. And if I do the same for for 5/8, I know 5/8 equals, I need a denominator of 8 times 3. So I'm multiplying the denominator by 3. I'll multiply the numerator by 3, and I have 15/24. So if I take 16/24 and 15/24, I know 16/24 is greater than 15/24. And if I go back to my original fractions, 2/3 and 5/8, therefore 2/3 is greater than 5/8. So let's take another example to illustrate this method of finding a common denominator. Let me get rid of this, and let's take an example of 7/18 and 11/24. Now, as we did earlier, one common denominator for 8 times 3. So let me write that down. So one common denominator or common multiple, let me call it multiple. So one common multiple of 18 and 24 is 18 times 24. Just like we did earlier, we said a common multiple for 8 and 3 is 8 times 3. So common multiple for 18 and 24 is 18 times 24. But that's going to make these numbers really big, and it's going to make the problem more complicated than it is. So I'm not going to use 18 times 24 as a common multiple. Instead of that, I'm going to figure out the LCM of, or the least common multiple of 18 and 24. And the way I do it is, I'm going to set it up this way, 18 and 24. I'll keep factoring out factors that are common to both 18 and 24. So I know 2 is common to 18 and 24. And if I factor that out, I'm left with 9 and 12. I know 3 is common to 9 and 12. And if I factor that out, I'm left with 3 and 4. And now nothing else is common to these two. So the way I figure out the LCM is basically the product of these numbers. LCM equals 2 times 3 times 3 times 4. I could also write this as 18 times 4, or I could write this as 24 times 3. And I like to write it this way because it makes it easier to find the equivalent fractions. Let me show you how. So if I have 7/18, I know I need a denominator of 18 times 4. So if I multiply the denominator by 4, let me multiply the numerator by 4, and that makes it 28 over 72. And if I do the same to 11/24, I know that I need a denominator of 24 times 3. And if I multiply the denominator by 3, I'll multiply the numerator by 3. And that is 33 over 24. So if, 33 over 72. So now if I take 28/72 and 33/72 over 72, 28/70 over 72 is less than 33 over 72. And if I go back to my original fractions, 7/18 and 11/24, this would mean that 7/18 is less than 11/24. So this was a nice way of figuring out the LCM to find the common denominator, and it made the problem much simpler instead of taking the common denominator as 18 times 24.